Face ID. It's a feature that most iPhone users likely take for granted, and a feature that many Android users may not know they're missing out on. A secure Face ID, that is, because until now, Apple's iPhones were the only phones that had a secure enough Face ID system that could be used not only to unlock your phone, but also as a secure way to biometrically identify you. Being able to sign into accounts by having your face scanned makes it so fast and easy to log into apps or accounts which may have extra layers of verification for security reasons. In particular, banking, payment, and health-related apps may have more sensitive or personal data, so making sure that nobody but you can access your accounts is something that phone makers and app developers have to take very seriously. Now, some of you non-iPhone users might be thinking, I have Face ID on my phone, why can't I sign into these apps with just my face? Is my facial recognition somehow not biometrically secure? And the answer is, unfortunately, no, it's not. Most Face ID systems on Android phones use a simple 2D method where they compare a 2D image of your face that they capture with their front-facing or selfie cameras and compare that with stored images of your face from when you initially set up Face ID. With the latest release of the Google Pixel 7s and 8s, Android is bringing back Face ID in a new and creative way. To explain this, let's look at the two ways Face ID has historically been done on smartphones, which will help us understand why Google's latest approach is such a big deal. Let's start with talking about Apple. I actually made an entire video on Apple's Face ID system, so if you want to learn more, I will link that in the description box below. But to give a very high-level overview, they have a camera system called TrueDepth, which includes a set of regular cameras, infrared or IR cameras, various sensors, and a dot projector, which work to create real-time 3D maps of your face. The dot projectors use LEDs to shine dense patterns of over 30,000 dots on your face that are only detectable by IR cameras. With this camera system, they are able to extract some 3D model of your face, on which they use machine learning to determine whether there is a match to the model it learned when you set up Face ID the first time. They also likely use a ton of data of different facial expressions that help them recognize you in all your different states and looks. And as I mentioned in my other video, while we don't know exactly how they calculate depth, it does look like they only use one IR sensor to capture this projected pattern of dots on your face. And if this projection pattern is already known to the camera system, how the sensor in the camera sees the projected pattern is what provides the depth information. The disparities between the expected dot pattern and the dot pattern captured by the camera can be used to calculate depth at each pixel. So if you tried to trick this 3D Face ID system by holding a 2D image of your face up to the cameras, the dot projection would indicate that the face is actually on a 2D plane and does not have the same 3D topology as your face or really any human face. On the Android side, the Google Pixel 4 actually had a very similar system which they called TrueDepth, which had IR cameras and a dot projector. Their setup was different in that they used two IR cameras and a robust stereo matching algorithm to compute depth. Stereo vision systems reconstruct depth using parallax, which is the difference or disparity in the apparent position of an object viewed along two different lines of sight. This is exactly how our human visual systems operate and how we perceive depth. You can even observe this effect yourself if you close one eye, hold up a finger in front of you, notice where it appears to be, and then switch eyes. It should look like your finger is shifting a little to the right or left whenever you switch eyes. And this is because the actual position of your finger that is captured on the retina of each eye is different. It's then simple geometry to use the horizontal displacement of each point on your finger to calculate real physical depth at each point. In a 3D camera system, we'd calculate the depth at each pixel and get a dense 3D depth map of whatever the stereo camera system captures. This problem of calculating depth between corresponding points in two images relies on knowing which points between the two images actually correspond to the same object or same point in physical space. In other words, we need to be able to match corresponding points between two images, hence the term stereo matching. For distinct points or distinct features like your eyes, for instance, matching is pretty easy. But for textureless regions like your forehead or cheeks, for example, it's not as easy to figure out precisely which point in one image corresponds to which point in the other image. So this is where the IR dot projector steps in to provide texture. It may look like a random scattering of points, but it's actually a very precise pattern that the stereo matching algorithm knows. So by looking for known patterns of points, it's really easy to see which parts of the images correspond to one another. As you can see, this 3D imaging system adds a bit of complexity to the phone's camera system, and with their next phone, the Pixel 5, Google decided to simplify their hardware, likely to cut costs, and since then, they haven't brought back any IR sensors or dot projector. Now, the other way that Face ID systems have worked over the years, and this is the main method that Android phones today use, is they rely on a purely 2D imaging system, which I mentioned earlier, meaning they have no sensors that can capture depth. Therefore, they cannot detect the 3D topology of your face, and they can only rely on matching the 2D front-facing view of your face with known 2D images of your face, which can easily be fooled with a 2D photograph of your face. So this is one of the least secure biometric verification systems. Even phones like the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, for example, which has an overall very powerful camera system, a lot of these phones still have this kind of 2D facial recognition system. To improve security, actually, many companies that only have 2D facial recognition capabilities actually combine their 2D facial recognition systems, which are not secure biometric authenticators, with fingerprint ID systems, which are very secure biometric authenticators. Okay, so historically, 3D systems that identify you by computing a 3D map of your face have traditionally relied on IR sensors and dot projectors, and the much simpler but less secure 2D systems identify you simply by looking at the 2D image of your face from your front-facing camera. In the latest Google Pixel phones, the 7s and 8s, we actually have 3D Face ID with only your phone's front-facing camera. They don't need IR cameras or dot projections, which is pretty cool. So how do they do it? They still only use the front-facing selfie camera, but Google claims that the selfie camera is a dual pixel camera that is able to detect some depth. What does that mean? What is a dual pixel camera, and how would it be able to detect depth? Dual pixel cameras have actually been used in smartphones for years, but primarily for the purpose of supporting autofocus capabilities. Dual pixel autofocus, as it's called, is an extension of something called phase detection autofocus, which is a technology used in cameras to quickly and accurately focus on a subject. For phase detection autofocus, 5 to 10% of all the image sensor's pixels have two independent photodiodes, which are the parts of the sensor that sense how much light is hitting the sensor. The camera's processor compares the light intensity measured by the two photodiodes, and if they match, it knows that this area of the image is in focus. And if they don't match, it then looks at other pairs of photodiodes to calculate which direction the lens needs to be adjusted to achieve sharp focus and how much adjustment is required. Of course, using more dedicated phase detection pixel pairs makes phase detection autofocus more reliable and more accurate. And in the move to dual pixel autofocus, which is what the Pixel 8s have, every pixel on the image sensor is used for phase detection autofocus and contributes then to calculating phase differences and adjusting focus. So on the front-facing camera image sensors on the newest Pixel phones, every pixel has both a left and right photodiode, and these dual views, even though they're only fractions of millimeters apart, allow for computing depth from stereo, which is what I mentioned earlier as coming from 2 IR cameras on the Pixel 4. In other words, on the latest Pixel phones, for every pixel on these little image sensors in the front-facing cameras, the viewpoints captured by the left and right sides of each pixel are different enough to compute stereo and produce a depth map. They didn't explain this technology as it pertains to the Pixel 7s or 8s specifically, but they did write a blog post about it when the Pixel 2 and Pixel 2 XL cameras came out, because this is the same technology that's used in the Pixel 2's portrait mode feature, which aims to focus the subject while artificially blurring the background to mimic the bokeh effect. In fact, ever since the Pixel 2s, Google has used dual pixel autofocus to create depth maps for portrait mode using just one lens. The next year, in a blog post about how they've improved portrait mode for the Pixel 3, they talk about some of the downsides of using a purely vision-based stereo matching algorithm, and to improve the depth maps, they take the phase detection autofocus depth map, which is a dense depth map that might have some artifacts or poorly estimated depths, and they pass this through a neural network to get a higher quality depth map. And apparently the GPU on the Pixel 3 was powerful enough to run this neural network very quickly, and now their Pixel 8 hardware is way more powerful. The Tensor G3 enables on-device generative AI, so needless to say, running a neural network on a depth map to get an improved version should be easy for it to do. And they also say for the Pixel 8, Face Unlock meets the highest Android biometric class, so you can use it to log into apps that require a secure login. Now, a downside to this approach to computing depth maps is that it doesn't work very well in low light conditions, which create noisy images, meaning pixel intensities have more random variations in their values, so obtaining accurate disparity or phase differences in low light conditions is very challenging. Google tries to address this shortcoming by using measurements across all pixels to smooth out noise, but low light conditions still pose challenges. It also is yet to be seen whether the Pixel 8s with this method of getting depth from the front-facing camera can be used for some of the same AR and VR applications as the iPhones can be used for because of their TrueDepth camera system. I suspect it'll be a while before iPhones are dethroned as leaders in this aspect, but for more on how iPhones are used in AR and VR applications, go check out that TrueDepth video. In any case, I think Google's approach to calculating depth from a single image is quite creative, and they're really showing the power not only of software, but of having a well-integrated hardware-software system, with the Tensor G3 chip supporting all the machine learning that phones will inevitably have to do to keep up with competition. Does having a secure Face Unlock feature on your phone matter to you? Are you impressed by Google's latest phones? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button down below. Of course, subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.